Sony had a couple big camera announcements this past week in regards to their new cameras they're coming out with, the FS5 and the A7S Mark II. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the FS5, but I am making another video about the A7S Mark II, so if you'd like to check that out, you certainly can. It should be on my channel. But for the FS5, this is kind of a baby brother to the excellent FS7, a very popular Sony camera. And the FS5, let's go through the specs real quick. It's a Super 35 sensor, so not full frame, but certainly a cinema standard, very filmic. It's got a 12 megapixel sensor, so very similar to what they've done with the A7S, where they're using a lower megapixel sensor to pull the 4K footage. They've also added an electronic ND filter to the FS5, which we'll see how that actually pans out. I haven't shot with a camera that has an electronic ND filter, so only actual physical ND filter. So we'll see how that actually works and what it looks like in terms of if it's hurting the image quality at all or anything like that, but that should be pretty interesting and pretty cool actually if it actually works the way they say it's going to work. The FS5 has S-Log3 as well as S-Log2 if you're interested in shooting with a log profile. And with the S-Log3 profile, it is rated at ISO 3200. So you will have to shoot with a slightly higher ISO than you might be used to if you want to shoot with S-Log3. A couple other cool features about the FS5 is that it will record 8 seconds of 240 frames per second at 1080p. So 240 frames per second, 1080p, you only get 8 seconds of it, but that's pretty useful, especially if you have something in a controlled environment and you know exactly what you're filming in slow motion. And most of the time when you're doing slow motion, you can kind of guess what that would be. You've also got the option to record 960 frames per second at 720p for 19 seconds. So a little bit wider a window, 19 seconds, and even a higher frame rate, 960 frames per second, almost 1,000 frames per second, but you are shooting at 720p. This camera internally will do 100 megabits per second, 4K, 8-bit 420. So if you want to shoot internal 4K with this, you are going to be limited to an 8-bit codec that's only 420 color sampling. If you shoot 1080p internally, however, you will get 10-bit 422. So that is something to consider if you are interested in that. The camera records to SD cards, which is fantastic. I'm glad to see that because SD cards are very cheap and affordable, so you're not going to be spending a lot on media. Now, the estimated price right now for the pre-order is $5,600. Certainly affordable for a camera like this, but not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like anyone can just plop down the cash tomorrow at Best Buy and pick this thing up. It will take a little bit of an investment, and they are expected to be shipping these come November 2015. Now, I think this camera looks great on paper. It's a little bit smaller than the FS7, so a little bit more run and gun, handheld, lightweight. They have talked about, flying it on a drone, and I think the camera itself without anything on is less than a pound or less than a kilogram. I have to check on that, but looks pretty cool on paper. I am a little disappointed that the 4K internal isn't 422 or 10-bit. That would have been really, really nice, but I'm sure that Sony is trying to keep this more cost-effective camera and keep the price down in terms of getting people excited. But still, the features on paper look really nice, and this is certainly a more affordable version of the FS7. It has some of the really cool high frame rate features that camera has, and overall should be a really nice camera. And given the price point, it's not cheap, but it's also not a huge investment in something like, a high-end Arri or Red or even, the high-end Sony cameras. It's just not in that price range. So really good budget option, and the images out of it, they're looking good, but that's to be expected. Most cameras nowadays do a good job shooting. I should say that this is estimated that this will be around 14 stops of dynamic range if it has all the same features as the FS7, which it's expected it will because it's a very similar sensor. And so 14 stops dynamic range and, internal 4K, that's awesome, especially for the price. But it is unfortunate that 4K is not a better codec, just because if you are shooting log, you might run into some problems with it being only 8-bit and 420. However, you could certainly buy an external recorder and do something, get some 10-bit 422 color sampling out of an external recorder like an Atomos Shogun or the new Atomos Ninja Assassin. One of those would do very well with this. But then again, you're adding external stuff, you're driving the price up, and maybe at that point you would just want to buy an FS7. So On paper, it's looking really good. I probably won't get one. Maybe I'll rent one for a shoot. We'll see. But I'm kind of over the form factor of this. I feel like a lot of these companies, Panasonic, Sony, they understand that there are professionals out there who want cameras like this, but they end up charging a premium for the form factor with XLR and everything built right in. I'm much more of a fan of the DSLR style shooting where you just have a camera block and you get your image there, and then you record your audio elsewhere, and maybe, yeah, you don't have built-in NDs and you don't have HDSDI or whatever it might be, but you can shoot very cheaply, very affordably, and still get very similar images. And I just like the smaller DSLR form factor anyway, especially for going out and taking photos and just being able to run a gun, pick something up, put it in my hand if I need to, but I can also rig it out and do something a little bit more high-end as well. So I probably won't buy one, but it's certainly a cool camera for the people who are interested in it, especially people who are looking at the DVX 200, which is a little bit different because that's got a fixed lens, but on paper they have very similar features. Besides the frame rate, I don't believe the Panasonic DVX 200 does anything like the Sony FS5 in terms of frame rates, but we'll see what else comes out. People are still talking about the Ursa Mini because that's finally starting to ship. The 4K and the 4.6K versions are slowly starting to roll out, and people are comparing that to this. But in either case, you got to look at all the other factors that go into each of these cameras because almost all of them aren't ready to shoot right out of the box. So that initial investment in just the camera isn't going to get you to the point where you can be up and rolling, because you probably want stuff, you know, if you want the hand grip, or you want the shoulder rig, or you want the viewfinder, whatever it is on all these different cameras. They're always selling you these add-ons that can certainly add up to quite a bit of money. So just keep that in mind. Keep in mind the media that it records to. The Ursa Mini, I know I'm getting off topic here with all these other cameras, but they're all kind of in that similar price point. So if you're interested in getting a camera like this, check out the Ursa Mini, the Panasonic DVX 200 when that comes out. And you could even consider upgrading to the FS7 if the FS5 doesn't have everything you need on paper, because the FS7 is a great camera. So hopefully this will be out in November and we can play around with it and see how it works, because there's nothing better than getting your hands on a new camera. That's a lot of fun.